All right, today we're going to be talking about a very specific aspect of vocal processing, and that's getting your vocals to sit nicely in a mix. In a lot of cases, you might apply vocal processing, you feel really good about it, sounds amazing in solo, and as soon as you unsolo it and listen to it in the context of the mix, it either gets totally lost or it sticks out sitting on top of the music so that you can't hear everything else. So there's a very specific set of things that you can do to make sure that when you're mixing vocals, they're sitting neatly in the mix. That's what we're going to be covering today. So first and foremost, let's listen to a snippet of the song here. Okay, so this is kind of a modern black metal style song, and we're going to start at the track level. I'm going to go ahead and turn all my processing off, and then we're going to work up to the bus level so you can see what effects are specifically fitting this into the mix. So starting at the track level, you want to do the basics. So you want to do some EQ, make sure that you're cleaning up the right areas. In this case, we're cutting all the low end information out. We're dipping out some of the boxiness. We're making some space here for the electric guitars, and we're boosting the high end. I have other videos where I go deeper on EQ. Just know that you should start with good EQ. Next, these are arguably contributing to the glue of the vocals into the mix, but these are not the main levers that we're going to pull, so I'm going to move through them quickly. We have 2 levels of compression, very standard for vocal processing. We have a fast 1176 style compressor into a slow and analog style LA2A compressor, and I'm using the UAD versions of both plugins, so this is what those are doing. So you can see that first 1176 is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and the LA2A is doing some cleanup. Make up some of the gain. So it sounds like the dynamics are properly controlled, but you can hear now it's sitting on top of the mix, right? After those 2 stages of compression, I have saturation. Saturation is also very important to getting that glued in effect. So I'm going to start with the saturation, disengage, and then engage it, so you can hear how that's taking this really on top of the mix sounding vocal and starting to tuck it in a little bit. Subtle, but gluing vocals is a relatively subtle process. So what we've done now is kind of the basics. We've done the bread and butter EQ, compressor 1, compressor 2, and saturation. Now we're going to get into the wet effects, and this is where the glue really starts to take effect. And if you haven't heard that term glue that I keep using, it is essentially what it sounds like. If you have unprocessed music, you might hear things kind of floating all over the stereo image, poking out awkwardly, masking other pieces of the music. And what glue does is it just fits them right in there, which is what we're focused on today with the vocals. So for wet effects, I'm going to use a combination of reverb and delay. As you can see here, I'm going to light the first one up. I'm doing all of these on the auxiliary send. So I'm creating a new auxiliary channel. I'm putting the reverb effect on that channel, and then I'm choosing how much of the core track I want to send to that auxiliary channel. It gives you a lot more control so that it doesn't turn into a soupy, reverby mess. The first level of reverb I'm using here is some long reverb. So I'm using a chamber setting in Valhalla Vintage Verb. You can use any reverb plugin. I just really like this one. And I'm doing a relatively long decay with at least 10 milliseconds of pre-delay. So what that means is we're going to hear the beginning of the line very clearly, but then it's quickly going to tuck into the rest of the song when that reverb takes effect. So let's hear what that sounds like. Very subtle, but if you listen to it soloed, you're going to be on the trail, really aware of it, right? On the trail, stay. Okay, so we don't want it to sound like that in the mix. It sounds really overdone. That's why it's important to do these changes in the context of the mix. On the trail. Okay, the next thing I'm going to add here, I have another send, and I'm adding some delay. I'm going to use some basic quarter note delay. You can use any plugin you wish for this. I'm using Echo Boy. And again, in context, it's just going to add a little glue. So let's start with it disengaged in the mix, and then we'll engage it for the second pass. On the trail, stay. Yeah. Hard to hear the delay in the mix, but listen to what it sounds like when soloed.
Stay behind.
Really, really obvious there, right? And then the last thing we're going to add is another level of reverb. I like to have one that's relatively fast. This one has a 1 second delay. The other one had almost a 4 second delay. So one that's really fast and one that's relatively slow. I'm going to have the pre-delay up to 20 milliseconds here. And the key with the color is just to use a different kind of reverb. You want different things kind of adding on top of one another to create a glue effect. So in the other reverb send that I had a chamber. On this one, I have hall. So before we go to bus processing, let's finish off track level processing. When it comes to glue, the heavy lifters in terms of creating the glue effect here are one, the saturation. We're using Decapitator. First level of reverb, we're using Vintage Verb with a long decay. Then we're using some quarter note delay, and then we're using a reverb with a short decay. And this is what all of those together sound like in the mix. And then we'll move to the bus. So starting to fit in still sounds a little awkward. That's because we now need to move to bus processing. So the key with glue is to apply like processing to lots of different kinds of sound. So we've applied processing to one of the vocal tracks. What we're going to do is we're going to send all vocal tracks to one master vocal bus, which we call the acapella bus. And that just means everything I do on this bus is going to process all of those vocal tracks the same way. So I'm going to do very basic EQ cleanup. Not going to spend a lot of time there. I'm also going to add Soothe 2 on the bus. And Soothe 2 is basically you can sweep for areas where you have frequencies you don't like, and Soothe 2 will dynamically take those frequencies out. So just consider it another EQ. So we have EQ on the bus, and where it starts to get interesting is with bus compression. So the purpose of compression at the track level is to control the dynamics so that you don't have crazy changes in volume happening over the track. The purpose of bus compression is very different. The goal with this is not actually to dramatically change the dynamics. It's to apply the same processing to everything so that it sounds like it's coming from the same source and it starts to glue into the mix. So for bus processing, especially on vocals, recently I've been really into this G-Bus compressor plugin. And the way I'm going to dial this is I'm going to have a relatively fast attack on the bus because this is vocals. We don't want a super loud upfront transient followed by, very compressed tail. So relatively fast attack. The auto setting for release is just fine. 2 to 1 or maybe 4 to 1 ratio. I'm going to have 4 to 1 here. And I'm going to dial the threshold until I'm getting anywhere from 2 to 4 decibels of gain reduction. So let's start with this disengage, then I'm going to turn it on. And it's subtle. Glue takes a long time to hear, but you'll just notice the song sounds better.
On the trail, stay behind me.
See, I'm messing around with the gain now. You saw that as soon as I engaged it, we started clipping. So I threw a limiter on there just to catch those peaks. And now it's starting to settle into the mix. So I'm pretty happy with that level. You can see all it's doing is just tucking it in. We're getting 2 decibels of gain reduction, nothing crazy. And you can clearly hear the vocals, but you can clearly hear the instruments around it. So that's how to really fit vocals in. You could stop there if you wanted to. I generally like to add one more type of saturation, tape saturation, and I like to do this at the bus level. I'm using the Virtual Tape Machines plugin for that, but any will do. And this is just going to give you that kind of like leather on the seats final finish to really get thez vocals glued in.
On the trail, stay behind me.
All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So that's how to actually not just mix the vocals, but mix them so that they fit into your mix and they're glued in, the dynamics are controlled, and they sound like they're all part of one song recorded in the same room.